Good afternoon, members of Parliament, support staff, visitors in the public tribune, radio listeners, TV viewers, those following via social media, and members of the media. Welcome to this Central Committee meeting number 16 of Monday, April 3rd, 2023. I would like to give a special welcome to the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Doran, and his support staff. We have established a quorum of 6 factions. Please stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. Any notice of absence? I have not received any notice of absence, but I know MP Marlin is on a Parliament work trip. Are there any other notifications? MP Grisha Halligan-Martin, you have the floor.
A pleasant good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I'm sorry, I'm a bit off a bit today. Good afternoon to everyone regarding the sudden passing of Jaimeen Louisa. I'd like to please extend a heartfelt condolences to Eldert Louisa, his kids, Ivy and Joel. Heartfelt condolences to you. May you have strength in the coming days, and we will keep you in prayer. And I'm just lost for words, Mr. Chairman, and I just wanted to just give my condolences and let them know that they're all in my prayers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Grisha Halligan-Martin. The next person is MP Rolando Bryson. MP Bryson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to one and all. Mr. Chairman, in addition to already some condolences being given, I also want to express condolences to the family, friends, and the many fans of the artist known as Trill Mike, a local rapper who passed away tragically a few days ago. It's a very sad thing, especially, and it's been said in Parliament before, when our young people are lost, but especially seeing someone very talented with music leaving us, it is especially sad as well. So condolences to the entire country for this great loss.
Thank you, MP Bryson. No more notifications. We have an agenda point for this meeting. Draft National Ordinance amending the National Ordinance Socioeconomic Council to expand the scope of the advisory function of the Council. Under Parliamentary Year 2021-22-163, under IS Document 1285/2021-22, dated 5th September 2022. We go to the agenda point. On September 5th, 2022, Parliament received the draft National Ordinance amending the National Ordinance Socio-Economic Council to expand the scope of the advisory function of the Council. This document is registered as an incoming document IS 1285/2021-22, dated September 5th, 2022, under Parliamentary Year 2021-22-163. All members of the Parliament received a copy of this document via email, and it can be also found on the P drive of the Parliament. At this time, I would like to give the floor to the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Doran, for some opening remarks and presentation. Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Doran, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chairman, Honorable Members of Parliament, support staff, representative of the SER, and a special good afternoon to the people of St. Martin that are tuned in. Mr. Chairman, without further ado, I would like to delve right into my opening statement. Today, we are here to review the changes made to the National Ordinance of the Social-Economic Council, known as the SER. These changes are integral to the National Ordinance of SER and are of utmost importance to the role and the work method of the SER. The changes are specifically geared towards preventing legal technical imperfections and aims to create a broad legal basis for the optimal use of the SER. As we know, the SER is an advisory body tasked with advising the government on matters of socio-economic nature. It is a tripartite advisory body made up of employers, employees, and independent experts. Meaningfully, the SER employs the board based on a concept of welfare, which is essential for the stable and enduring development of our country. However, on the 22nd of November 2022, SER attended a Central Committee meeting here in Parliament to discuss its impasse with the Economic Council of St. Martin. As a result of the impasse, SER proceeded to make changes based on the first court verdict of June 29, 2022. De Landsverordening Sociaal-Economische Raad ter uitbreiding van de reikwijdte van de adviesfunctie van de Raad, and followed due process to have those changes vetted by the Department of Zittingsjaar, which is Judicial Affairs at the Government of St. Martin. Understanding that any changes made to the SER law will pose great concern for our country based on its organic nature, all of the changes are pertinent and have significant impact on the national ordinance. Some of these important examples are Article 3, the profile of the members and replacement members, Article 16, the conflicts of interest, and Article 18, duty of confidentiality. Under Article 3, the profile of the members and replacement members is being addressed. These members will now have to be established by national decree containing general measures, and 2 additional sentences will be added to the existing article that will help set the criteria for selecting SER members. Under Article 16, the amendments will regulate blood relations or ties to the second degree between sitting members. This measure is expected to minimize the risk of conflict of interest within the SER. Under Article 18, Mr. Chairman, the changes concern the strengthening of the confidentiality whereby members are being sworn to secrecy with regard to the matters that they become aware of due to their role on the council, as well as those matters that the council or chair of the SER deem confidential, thus imposing secrecy. Additionally, there are 4 conditions that apply, and they are listed under these articles. Lastly, in regards to Article 18, a paragraph has been added under Article 8. This paragraph was added to circumvent violations of Article 18 and has been lettered H. Reading, in the case of violation of Article 18, paragraph 1. However, Mr. Chairman, to shed some more in-depth light on these points of changes, I would like, with your indulgence and the indulgence of MPs, to allow Mr. Richardson to further elaborate deeper into the points. I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Dennis C. Richardson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not on yet. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to everyone. And I also extend my good afternoon to all MPs, as well as good afternoon to St. Martin. First, I would like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having the SER present for this Central Committee meeting. One thing I would like to do is immediately also we have a PowerPoint presentation so that we can follow the process. So I'm going to put that up right now. Let's see, and then we're going to go to the first table of contents. We're going to be looking at 4 items which relate to the current situation. Why is the amendment to the National Ordinance SER necessary? The legislative changes that are going to be considered, and then finally looking at the consultations that we've had in order to prepare this these adjustments. So once finished, Mr. Duran, the Vice or the Deputy Prime Minister, will then be able to answer any questions that the Parliament might have concerning what is shared. So we go into the first point. So in the considerations concerning our current situation, we're looking at 4 or 5 items or questions, as it were, that we would need to consider. 1, what is the task of the Council? Does the Council have the legal authority to advise Parliament? Which organizations or functions or foundations have the legal authority to be represented on the Council? And the final 2, what is the current procedure concerning the allotment of the seats among the stakeholder representatives? And then finally, what is the status of confidentiality within the council? So I'm going to go ahead now and begin to share within the context of each of those points represented. So what is the task of the council? Basically, the national ordinance gives the SER the authority and the position based on Article 2, Paragraph 1, to provide the government with advice on all significant matters of a social and economic nature. Point 2, does the council have the legal authority to advise Parliament? Most important to note that that is right now a no. We don't have the legal authority to do that, but that is the reason why we're here, so that we would be able to have the legal authority to be able to do that. So creating the legal provisions necessary. Which organizations or foundations have the legal authority to be represented on the council? Today there are 3 different parts, which includes 1, the employers, or the employees, sorry, the unions, who are represented by the WICLU, which is the Windward Islands Chamber of Labor Unions, the independent members that are based on the National Ordinance SER Article 3, Paragraph 5, who are appointed by the Prime Minister or, most importantly noted, the Minister of General Affairs. And then finally, the employers of St. Martin are represented by 2 different organizations dealing, 1, the Sualiga Employers Association, the SIA, and the Employers Council, St. Martin. The SIA is an umbrella organization for different entities. 1, the St. Martin Insurance Brokers Association, the Taxi Association, small and medium hotel sector representatives, and others. And then the ECSM, the Employers Council St. Martin, is also an umbrella organization representing the St. Martin Marine and Trade Association, the St. Martin Hospitality and Trade Association, better known as the SHTA, the Indian Merchants Association, and the St. Martin Timeshare Association. Coming down to the last 2 points. What is the current procedure concerning the allotment of the seats among the stakeholder representatives? The seat allotment is based on Article 3, National Ordinance SER. That could be gone into in detail at a later time with any questions. What is the status of confidentiality within the SER, within the council at this moment? At the moment, confidentiality within the SER can be improved. For example, in the past, we would read newspaper articles with information mentioned in our advice that were not yet public. Now, we're going to go into the next point, the next slide, which is dealing then with why is the amendment of the National Ordinance SER necessary? I'm going to read it from here. Basically, there are ambiguities. Based on that, it has become apparent that the current text of the National Ordinance Social-Economic Council contains ambiguities. It is desirable to implement legislative improvements in this national ordinance in order to avoid ambiguities in the text. That it is also desirable to expand the scope of the national ordinance whereby Parliament can also request advice from the Social-Economic Council. This has been, of course, a pet peeve, a concern for many years, and we are now at that point where it will be possible based on Parliament's decisions. Finally, to avoid litigation regarding the seat distribution between the stakeholders on the council. Thank you. So that ends that part. And what we're going to do now is focus in on the different advice points, which has to do with the different articles that we're going to be considering to be changed or adjusted to get their specific tweaks, put it that way. So what we're looking at is we have Article 2. The Minister, Vice Minister, Prime Minister already represented Article 3, Article 16, and Article 18 as to the adjustments that will be made on those. So the ones that I will be dealing with is Article 2, Paragraph 2 and 1 and 2, Institution and Task. Article 6, the membership. Article 8, grounds for dismissal. Article 10, chairman, a chairperson and vice chairperson. Article 11, the secretaris. Article 12, term and reappointment. Article 13, invitation for first meeting. So, we begin with Article 2. The important change is to extend the scope of the Council's advisory function. These changes contribute to the more efficient performance of the duties of the Social-Economic Council. The Council advises the government and Parliament on the main lines of the socio-economic policy to be pursued. In the past, Parliament submitted requests for advice to the Council on several occasions, which advices have also been processed by the Council without there being any legal basis for this. With the addition of a second paragraph, the President of Parliament will be formally enabled to directly invoke the Council's advisory function. Article 6. The other requirements for membership of the SER are laid down in Article 5 and 6 of the National Ordinance SER. The addition of the components is based on the manner in which the SER's duties are performed. The SER has established, so in Curaçao, the SER has established a profile for its members by national decree, and that was done on May 7th, 2018, 5 years ago. Article 8. This article regulates the dismissal criteria. One paragraph is added whereby the Council can dismiss a member by national decree. It concerns a violation of the confidentiality clause. Article 10. Article 10 deals with the chairperson who is a member of the Council and, like any other member, has a deputy member. This alternate member does not act as vice chairperson, but referring to the deputy of the chairman or the chairperson, in the text of the current national ordinance, the impression can be created that it concerns the deputy member of the chairperson, while in practice, the vice chairperson is meant. To avoid confusion, his deputy in Article 10 is replaced by vice chairperson. Therefore, a second paragraph is added to this article, which indicates when the vice chairman acts in that capacity. Now, we're going to the Article 11. The secretaris cannot always be present at all meetings. A paragraph is added to Article 11, which stipulates that the secretaris has a deputy in his or her absence, which deputy is designated by the secretaris from the secretariat. Article 12. The current Article 12 sets no limits on the number of times members and deputy members can be reappointed. To avoid the board becoming a fixed group of members, it is proposed that each member and alternate member be reappointed only once. In this way, other candidates are given the opportunity to be nominated as a member of the board. The former Minister of General Affairs agreed with this proposal as evidenced by the letter dated February 18th, 2019, with reference SER 19 DCB 002 to the Minister of General Affairs. Article 13. This article sets out the procedure for the very first meeting of the council, at which all 9 members must be present, or at least where all 9 members are officially notified that the chairperson and vice chairperson will be elected at this first meeting by the 9 members. When a new council takes office, elections must first be held. It is therefore important to amend Article 13 so that the secretaris can derive the legal basis to convene members for the first time. Basically, that was one of the sources of litigation, and that is why certain facts need to be adjusted within the articles so that we are able to go forward in a healthy manner. With that, my conclusion, Mr. MP. Vice Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Prime Minister, you have the floor. Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Richardson lacked 2 more points to bring forward, 1 more point to bring forward. With your indulgence, please.
Yes, forgive me. Yes, the consultations. Basically, we had consultations with the 4 different, in order to prepare the articles and to make the adjustments, the relevant adjustments. We considered the Department of Legal Affairs and Legislation, the Council of Advice. We had discussions also with the Curaçao, the Social-Economic Council of Aruba, and the Social-Economic Council of Curaçao. So I just wanted to make sure that was mentioned so that we have clarity on the scope of what we have been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. And is there any remarks you want to add up? Yes, Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you and the members of Parliament for their indulgence with the presentation by Mr. Richardson as well. I just want to reiterate the point with all the consultation that took place with the various entities, the various bodies, and I look forward now to any questions members of Parliament might have in this Central Committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister Duran. I look to my left now if there are any questions from any members of Parliament. I see MP Rolando Bryson. MP Bryson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to you, the Secretary General, my colleague members of Parliament, the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister with us today, and of course, the team from the SER present in the building and those following by various forms of media. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy that we are handling this law today. It is something that we've been hearing about, let's say, within this parliamentary term, and perhaps maybe even before. But definitely from 2020, we've been looking forward, or Parliament has been informed of some possible changes coming to the SER, one of which I'm sure is a welcome addition for especially the members of Parliament in terms of the ability to now have a formal procedure rather than going, let's say, through the Prime Minister, et cetera, that now the Parliament would have access to the SER, so to speak. I want to ask a few questions in that regard, and then I have a few other questions as well. Our current wet having process, so the right of initiative of members of parliament, does not currently include the advisory part of the SER. What now can happen is that as a result of this, we can now include the SER as part of that, because now we can seek advice if we're working on laws that have economic or social impact, which would be many laws, that the SER will be able to weigh an opinion. I can recall in some initiative legislation, actually the first one, the UTS law, that was one of the remarks as to if there is a sort of financial impact as a result of the selling of the shares and what those funds would go to, that perhaps it might have been interested at the time to hear the SER, let's say more so from the economic part, but maybe on the social aspect as well from it. My question would then be, as someone who makes use of the right of initiative as often as possible, what is the, let's say, capacity side of the SER and the policy or the preparation that the SER has made for additional advices coming from the members of parliament, let's say, not just for wet having, you also had members of parliament that via the Prime Minister asked for certain information or studies to be done. Is this going to cause a possible increase in workload at the SER? We have 15 members of parliament, and all of them will now have the right to use it, which is great. But just to hear maybe what the plans are from the SER to ensuring that they have sufficient capacity to deal with the increase in the number of requests that they might be receiving for advice. Also, in that sense, does the SER have some sort of urgency clause in terms of the handling or the speed of handling? Is there a time frame for the handling of advices? The reason I ask this is that we know that the legal process is already a very long one in St. Martin. It takes quite some time, be it the government or, let's say, members of parliament, to go through the process of getting laws here to the floor of parliament. Is there a possibility that the parliament can be informed on certain time frames that can be put in place where, okay, for example, we know it's very hard beforehand to know how long the SER would need to do certain studies. But perhaps if there's a certain time frame, I'm just giving an example. Let's say there's a time frame of 4 weeks, but that within those 4 weeks, if the SER is not able to deliver an advice, that the President of Parliament would then be informed, and then the initiator of that request can then be told, look, we've been busy with this for about 4 weeks. However, this is what we're working on, and this is maybe the estimated time frame, so that for our planning purposes, that we can have an idea on how soon the SER would be able to deliver such advices. And then they mentioned the discussions with the Council of Advice. That's kind of ties into this process. Have the discussions included that aspect, that now that the law will allow for members of parliament to go to the SER for advice, let's say on legislation, what were the results of the discussions with the Council of Advice in terms of integrating the route of there's now a SER that can get advice, give advice on legislation, and then that completed legislation would be able to go to the Council of Advice with the advice of the SER attached. So is that something that has been thought about and the opinion of the Council of Advice in terms of the handling? I also have a few questions, Mr. Chairman, because we did get a bit of a breakdown as to maybe why some of these changes are necessary, especially those related to the structure of the SER and the seats and all this type of stuff and who's on it. Mr. Chairman, I never thought, maybe it's my naivete, but I never thought that the seats at the SER were such a coveted or sought after thing that you have institutions that would go as far as taking it multiple court cases and letters to Parliament and so on. So it kind of opened my eyes as to, whoa, the SER is an advisory organ, a very important one. The advices are very impactful, but what is at play in terms of the insistence on trying to make sure for their life to secure that seat on the SER? I would like a bit of a explanation, if possible, from the SER as to where is this coming from? You know, this is not, you know, an organ that is supposed to have some sort of decision-making power or something? Where is the sentiment, or where in the opinion of the SER is the sentiment coming that certain institutions feel entitled and mandatory that they have to be a part of the SER or else? I want to get an indication on that from the SER. In that regard, I have a few questions, and I would ask you, Mr. Chairman, to the SER to, I'm posing these questions in such a way that it allows the SER maybe to hear the arguments from the other side, because there's always two sides to the opinion and the story. And hopefully with these questions, the members of parliament can get better indications. The first question is about the term limit of members and substitute members. Of course, it's necessary to implement that. But my question is, just to reiterate what the current term is, and then why or what is the reason that the SER is proposing a 2-term limit in its national ordinance? Has there been issues with this in the past? Is this just a standard thing? I think it is for most boards that there should be a term limit. But if we can get an indication as to why the SER specifically proposed to the government to have that change. There's been, of course, much said, and this is very public because there's been court cases and press releases about it regarding I don't know if to use the term employer council or SHTA, if you can please clarify that point. But members being banned from the SER.
MP Bryson?
Yes?
Please direct your question to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Oh, yes,
Thank you,
indeed.
sir.
Indeed. Let me clarify that indeed the questions are to the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, but the idea would be, if I understand what I read in the legislation, that this was drafted on proposal of the SER. So therefore, the Prime Minister, via you, Mr. Chairman, is being asked more from the reasoning why this was proposed by the SER. So that is why I'm constantly referring to the SER itself. So yeah, is there any truth to people being banned from attending? That would be a big concern. And it is who took such decisions and why. What is the criteria, if any? I see a clause is being put in to create criteria for who joins the SER. That is good. But what is the current criteria, if anything? On what grounds was the ECSM suspended? And can the SER just exclude members from the employers from participating in meetings? I think that needs to be clarified, that if indeed that was the case, is the SER in a position to be able to do so? I've read of many court cases and so on. Have those court cases concluded? Are there any current court cases with the SER that they can speak of course? If we can get that information from the Prime Minister regarding any court cases that the SER is involved in. And are members from the ECSM back on the board? Or has that been resolved now? Who decides whether they can sit on the board or not? Which advices have been submitted to government, and was there sufficient employer input in these advices? So to ensure, just to explain, the reasoning I see behind the SER having a sort of a labor side and employer side is to create that balance. But I would like to ensure that employers have sufficient voice, that it is consistently a 50-50 sort of situation, that both sides have the opportunity and been given sufficient opportunity to weigh in. Sometimes there are situations where an employer side and a labor side can agree with something that would have to go forward. But if I would look at much debate that has taken place for decades in St. Martin, for example, regarding the minimum wage, that is a very divisive topic between labor and employers. So without having to go into the details of how those discussions went, I more would like to know, have both sides have sufficient opportunity to be heard? And is there a clause for dissenting opinion? So when advice comes out, if one side or anyone within the SER really feels adamantly that, look, this is the advice of the SER, but I want to make it known for the record that we don't think, for example, we don't think that the minimum wage should go up, and here's why. Or we don't think that the pension age should go up, and here's why. Or we don't think St. Martin should have its own national bank, and here's why. These are some examples of advices that have been issued by the SER before, and I would like to know if dissenting opinion is an option affordable to both sides. Because if that's the case, then to me there should be no concern that one side or the other is not being heard. State your dissenting opinion, let that be in the advice so that all involved, whether it's the government, the public, the business sector, the labor unions, the parliament, all of us can get all the information based on the merit of the advice. And finally, I believe the SARE law, to what extent does it protect? I think protect might be the wrong term. Is the SARE law or the draft as presented, does this sufficiently protect the board members itself from any sort of personal attacks, any sort of defamation, any sort of these things that when it gets heated, I guess hopefully the confidentiality would cover that. But it would be unfortunate if there's, where, like I said, it is a naturally, by nature, a very left and right, potentially, topics that can come up. But in the heated arguments that take place, is the board set up in such a way that there's sufficient room, have the arguments, leave it behind the doors, and everybody moves on with their life? Or maybe the confidentiality clause is being put in place to make sure that that can continue. And Mr. Chairman, finally, I would like to ask, it was very interesting to hear, let's say, the composition of the ECSM versus the composition of the SIA. And why I say that is that I believe that once again, we have, let me not say we, I think there's a situation where even on the employer side, the country is being divided. Because is there a division, and this is more to the government, is there now a sort of division in our society where taxi drivers, local operators, etc., are being juxtaposed to hotels, restaurants, big business, marine sector, and that is why there's some sort of fight? Because that does not help St. Martin in any way. I think all businesses, it says employers, whether you're a mom and pop store, a taxi driver, a small operation, or you're a large operation, everybody employs people. As a matter of fact, in the recent budget based on the statistics that were shown, we see how much the importance is on small business and how much they contribute to the economy of St. Martin. I am a tourism professional. I believe that tourism is still, of course, 84% of our GDP comes from tourism, and a big portion of that comes from large companies. But our small companies that also contribute so much to our tourism product, how well is their voice represented on the employer side of it? And is that perhaps a reason why we have now seen 2 employer councils created in our country? That would be all for now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Bryson. The next person is MP Sarah Westcott-Williams. MP Sarah Westcott, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to my colleagues, and of course the Minister and the representatives of the SER. Good afternoon to all tuned in to this meeting of Parliament. I thank the Minister and the Social-Economic Council of St. Martin for their presentation on the proposals to make some amendments to the existing Social-Economic Council law. Mr. Chairman, the Social-Economic Council law currently speaks of the responsibility of the SER to advise on socioeconomic matters of significance. And I know for a fact that over the years, occasionally, we have had this discussion whether government considers a matter of socioeconomic significance or not. I could think of an issue at one point in time being on the budget, for example, and some of the measures that are in a proposed budget. Saying that to ask the following: does the Minister and/or the Council see the need to better outline and delineate at least a minimum framework of matters of socio-economic significance, so that it is not completely up to the discretion of the government to decide when that is the case or not. Secondly, the matter of the advices, and the SER and the minister were very keen on indicating that there were consultations, and as part of the legislative process, this draft law needed to go to the Council of Advice. I've seen the advice, I've seen the response by government, and even proposed changes based on the advice. However, with respect to some of the other consultations, is there anything that our SER has learned from especially their counterparts in terms of maybe best practices, changes over the year, etc., in addition to what our SER came up with, which are the matters presented to us today? Thirdly, with respect to unsolicited advice, is there some way that consideration can be given that some response is given to these advices, and that we don't end up with many advices on the book only to be referred to when it is convenient, rather than looking at an advice and saying, well, we can agree with some of what you state in here based on your findings, or we do not agree with some of what you're suggesting here. We will undertake action, or we will not undertake action. So that's my other question. And then how do you select your choice for and priorities for unsolicited advice? So what is the trigger for you to decide that? Is it based on what your members bring forward, what the council itself feels? So my question is, what is the trigger, especially in terms of priorities? Mr. Chairman, I look forward to the responses to these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Sarah Westcott-Williams. I don't see any more members having any questions. I see one. MP Christopher Emmanuel. MP Emmanuel, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to everyone, the SED, the Honorable Prime Minister, and the support staff, and everyone in the Tribune, my colleagues, and everyone, good afternoon. Mr. Chairman, what is amazing to me is here we have a High Council of State is in a, well, I can't say on their behalf, but at Parliament, requesting or asking or suggesting or giving information in terms of what's happening within the organization. A High Council of State, Mr. Chairman, not some type of put together committee down the road. And we have an association that is manipulating, if I should use that for lack of a better word, or using all within their books that they have to, whether it's to control seats or control whatever it is, or board members, or whichever way you want to put it. So, Mr. Chairman, my question to the Prime Minister, or to the respective individual to answer the question is, what is it exactly you're asking of Parliament to do? And what is it exactly you're asking of the government should be done? Because I am disturbed in terms of listening to a High Council of State is in a war, if I should put it that way, with an entity that's supposed to have seats on the board manipulating or coercing or trying to change the outcome in their benefit to suit their wishes and wills to how it's done. I would want to believe that it is the government's responsibility to see that a High Council of State is working and functioning optimal to the best of its ability to address the needs of the country, and not an entity that's supposed to have, or not supposed to, but have board members on it. Because then, Mr. Chairman, the question would be to the panelists or to the respective individual. Every time they said go to court or there's a court case levied, who pays for that when you have to get lawyers and you have to get representation and you have to get all sort of legal advice to be in a back and forth? So if we have to take the amount of court cases every time going to court, where is that money coming from? And I would want to believe it have to come from the budget of the said. And if that is the case, then that budget is coming from the people and other taxpayers' money. To me, Mr. Chairman, something is wrong with that. That you can see an entity as the SHTA is fighting a High Council of State to manipulate for their ways. So those are just a few questions that I have. Who pays for it when it comes to an embattled court case and it goes on and it drags on? In addition to that, what exactly is the said asking and looking for when it comes to Parliament and when it comes to the government? Because again, I can't get it understand how we have an institution that's supposed to be looking out for the best interest or is doing that, but is busy and can't represent to its best of its ability because of what is going on. Mr. Chairman, if that is the case, then something is deeply, deeply wrong with this scenario. I thank you very much.
Thank you, MP Christopher Emmanuel. I don't see any more members of Parliament for any questions. MP Bryson, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to clarify one of my questions to maybe get it a bit zeroed in on regarding the possibility for whichever members of the board to be able to be heard and given. I was specifically, if you look at Article 21, that speaks of a minority opinion and so on, maybe we can ask for some examples where that was requested, that if something isn't going according to any other sides or any other members' opinion, that opinion has an opportunity with Article 21 to be used. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Bryson. I look to my right. Minister, would you need some time or go into answering right away?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to start by thanking the honorable members of Parliament for the questions posed. I would need approximately a half an hour to return with the answers to the questions posed. Thank you.
Okay, I will adjourn the meeting until 3:25. Meeting adjourned until 3:25. Good afternoon and welcome back to the continuation of the Central Committee meeting today. I would directly get into the answers from the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Doran. Mr. Doran, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Once again, thank you to the honorable members of Parliament for the questions posed. I'll delve right into them. Questions posed by MP Bryson. Is there sufficient capacity of SER in preparation for additional solicitations for coming from Parliament? Yes, SER is in the process of recruiting one more policy advisor, as there are currently one vacancy. Does SER have any urgency clause to handle solicited advice quickly in terms of a set time frame? It is a policy within SER that urgent advices receive priority in their organization. Have the discussions with the COA yielded an opinion about how SER advises with advices to be handled with the COA? Yes, the draft ordinance SER was sent to the COA, Council of Advice. Based on the Council of Advice opinion, the Department of Legal Affairs incorporated explanatory notes. In addition, the Council of Advice gave a recommendation that once a law at the COA, it cannot be resent to the SED for advice. In the legislative process, the SED is always consulted prior to going to the Council of Advice. Explain the importance of the SED seat coveting, please. Where is the sentiment coming from that certain institutions feel it essential to hold on to a seat at SED? From the inception of SED, the Chamber of Commerce had 2 seats, the SCCT had 1 seat. As of 2020, government indicated that the employer should create an umbrella organization, and from that organization, the employers themselves would distribute the seats amongst themselves. However, the SHTA was not in agreement and created the ECSM, Employer Council St. Martin. Why is the SED proposing a 2-term limit? At the moment, there's no term limit to being a member of the SED. The Council of Law Enforcement, NSFV, and Central Bank of Curacao St. Martin, those institutions each have 2 terms. Currently, based on Article 8, Paragraph B, a member can remain on SER till the age of 70, unhindered. For example, if you're 35 years of age, you can sit on the council uninterrupted for 35 years. Same as if you were 25 years, you can be there for 45 years. The purpose of the change is to avoid the creations of the good old boys club, where one group of persons will be dictating and making decisions of the SED, which is not in the best interest of the country. To guarantee the progress of SED, new and varying members are needed on the board. Please clarify the relation of ESCM and SHTA. Representatives of SHTA created the umbrella organization Employer Council St. Martin. Is there any truth about people being banned from the SED? The ECSM was not banned. Based on the request from the ECSM on September 20, 2021, October 28, 2021, which went on until the end of the year, recusing themselves from meetings due to the ongoing court cases. 2 members, and I quote, herewith recuse themselves from today's meeting. As a result, the board of the SED agreed to their recusal and took the decision that until all litigation is done, they, the ECSM, cannot partake in meetings as this was a direct conflict of interest. There is no national decree banning ECSM from the SED. On what grounds was ECSM suspended? Is SED allowed to suspend members? This question was already answered. Are members from the ECSM back on the board? It is important to highlight the fact that since the last verdict, the SED has extended an invitation to the ECSM on 2 occasions for their reconciliation via the liaison of government, and in November and December 2022, to which date SED has not received a response. Which advices have been submitted to government and was employers duly represented? Yes, there was sufficient input of employers in the advices. Based on the verdict of June 29, 2022, in which the Court of Appeals of Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin, by verdict number SXM 2021 H00134, recognized that the SIA as an official employer representative on St. Martin. The list of submitted advices can be provided to Parliament in writing. Is a dissenting opinion allowed to be heard on matters that are based on the merit of the said advice, for example, the minimum wage or pension age? Letter of the advice, civil servants pension, had a dissenting view brought forward by a member amongst others based on Article 21 of the National Ordinance said. Does the draft proposed said law sufficiently protect the board members? The said law protects the members that are protected by the confidentiality clause. The redrafting of the article, we do not expect any problems. So just for clarity's sake, the said law protects the members that are protected by the confidentiality clause. So based on the redrafting, the SER does not foresee any problem, nor does government. The composition of ECSM and composing of the SIA, is there a division between the employers? Is there a division between small employers versus large employers? Are small companies' voices represented as well? And does that have anything to do with creating of the employer councils? Currently, small companies, as I mentioned before, are currently represented by the SIA. I move on, Mr. Chairman, to questions posed by MP Westcott Williams. Does the minister see the need to better outline the significant socio-economic nature, matters of socio-economic nature? In the past, SED has issued advices on various requests for advice from Parliament. It is important that members of Parliament are aware of the grounds on which a request for advice may be rejected and what the request for advice is not rejected arbitrarily. The request for advice must have a socio-economic character. A request for advice is rejected if the socio-economic aspect is not sufficiently prominent. I move on to the next question posed by MP Westcott. Is there anything that SER has learned from their counterparts in relation to best practices in addition to changes posed? Mr. Chairman, I'll read up the questions and with your indulgence, allow Mr. Gerard, the SG from the SER, to answer this question, which is geared towards the SER. With respect to the unsolicited advice, is there any concern put forward towards unsolicited advice and how is it used? With your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Richardson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, MPs. With regards to the question from MP Westcott Williams, what we have learned over the years from Ser Curacao and Ser Aruba is that the law of the National Ordinance Social Economic Council has too many loopholes. Last year there were 2 court cases brought forward by the Employer Council St. Martin, and we could see that the reason behind these court cases is basically the loopholes that are in the law, and they have a right. Every institution, organization, foundation has a right to petition the court for various reasons. We see in Ser Curacao, for example, that there is a criteria when it comes to the chairperson. Not everyone can be a chairperson. The Netherlands has criteria. The Ser Netherlands and the Ser Curacao have set out their own here we would call it a landsbesluit. In the Netherlands, they call it a beschikking. So in that criteria, in that beschikking, you have different criteria that members of the Social Economic Council have to adhere to. So at the moment, we don't have that. So for example, you want to be chairman, for example, and this is an issue that we're dealing with. In Curacao and in the Netherlands, the chairperson is mainly the independent members. Why? The independent member doesn't represent anyone. They sit there on their own accord. The issue we're having in St. Martin, in a small community, if you would have someone from the SHTA become the chairperson of the Social-Economic Council. My question to Parliament is who is speaking when? Is it the opinion of the SHTA? Is it the opinion of the Social-Economic Council? The lines will be blurred. We have to be very careful. The same thing goes for the unions. If you have, for example, the unions as chairperson, who is speaking? The WIFL, the WITSU, whose views are being represented? In a small community, if you say something today, tomorrow it's your opinion, it's your facts, and then tomorrow, for example, what you would have, let's say a union takes a certain position. They don't want to sit with government, they don't want to negotiate salaries, they don't want to do that. Now the SER is asked to give an advice, for example, and that same person who's a member of the union is the chairperson of the Social-Economic Council, and they take a hard stand. Whose opinion is it? Is it that of the union? Is it that of the SER? So we have to be very careful. I'm not saying that I am against or for. That's not my job. That's for Parliament and the legislators to decide. With regard to the other question from MP Westcott Williams, the unsolicited advices. The unsolicited advices are prioritized based on the opinion of the board. So if the board is of the opinion that waste management is important, waste management would be brought forward. If the board is of the opinion that clean energy is important, that option will be tabled and discussed in the board meetings. So it's up to the board to decide what gets priority. We don't have a policy on that. The board members decide, not the SG, not the staff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I see MP Sarah Westcott-Williams, you wanted the floor for any questions or remarks, or after Minister does his answerings for the rest of the questions? Okay. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move on to questions and answers. Questions posed by MP Manuel. What is the SER asking of Parliament to do and asking of government? Through government, the SER is requesting strong consideration to approve this draft national ordinance. The next question posed. Who pays when an entity takes government or a High Council of State to court? It is from the SER budget. Ultimately, the taxpayer pays when it comes to these court cases because the budget is approved and allocated by government to these entities. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the responses. I look forward to any clarifications members of Parliament might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I now see on my left is MP Sarah Westcott-Williams. MP Sarah Westcott-Williams, you have the floor.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon again. Mr. Chairman, my question regarding when government has to request the advice of the SER, it might have been misunderstood based on the answer that I heard, because what I was getting at is whether it is felt that the significant socioeconomic matters, which according to law, the government should hear the SER on, if that is not too open-ended. And for example, something can come to Parliament with what one or more members would consider of significant socioeconomic value, so to speak, but the government might feel it was not necessary for us to consult the SER. That is where I was going with that question, and where I mentioned as an example, the budget, one could say, could have serious socioeconomic consequences on different levels. However, this is not a proposed law that is usually or ever sent to the SER before it comes to Parliament. So that's what my question was all about, but the answer did not go into the question. Secondly, Mr. Chairman, if just off your table, the top of your head, if you can give me an indication on the amount of advices that you wrote with respect, of course I can look it up, but just I want to get to another point. That's why the question regarding pension system and or systems on St. Martin. I know for a fact that the SER has written about it, and if you can just indicate it was 2, 3, 4, whatever the case may be, because my next question to you would be, looking at the proposal that is now on the table of the Parliament of Curaçao for a general pension. And it is something that I would like to get the views on from the different institutions here on St. Martin about the approach for a general pension that is now doing the rounds on Curaçao. So I just want to know what we have there right now, as said, in terms of pension, general pension, and then, as I mentioned, it has to do with that objective. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Sarah Westcott-Williams. I have MP Rolando Bryson. MP Bryson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon once again. Thank you through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Minister and the SER for the answers to the questions posed. Very interesting explanation, especially the explanation that we received regarding the 2-term limit. So my follow-up question to that would be, once this law, if the Parliament approves it, what happens to sitting members that have been there for more than what 2 terms would apply to? Is it that, let's say, Van Rechtswege, they would no longer be able to sit on the board, just to understand that? And then is it that the Prime Minister would then have to propose new members? Because that's also a question that I have, maybe to give clarity to the situation. When I read the legislation of the SER, to me it's very straightforward, but maybe there's more intricacies to this. But Article 3 states that the council consists of a maximum of 9 members who are appointed by national decree on the recommendation of the Minister of General Affairs. So, of course, it does say that 6 members in Section 2, 6 members are appointed who can be regarded as industry representatives. Of those 6, 3 will come from employer side, 3 would come from the employee circle, okay? So that's what I was talking about, the dichotomy that exists within the SER. But now coming back to the Prime Minister's recommendation. So the question to the Minister would be, once this law, if approved, what actions will be taken then from the government? Is it expected that then if there are new vacancies, are we prepared to then make sure that the board remains filled, that there's not too much of a transition? Because like we just said, when this law passes, then also members of Parliament will now be able to send advices, and that kind of ties back to my question about capacity. So again, what next is basically would be the question if this law passes. Interesting to hear that the ECSM recused themselves because publicly it did come across completely different. It came across like people were removed and banned from meetings and so on, and that's where it's fortunate to maybe have meetings like this where that clarity can be given. So I want to thank them for the clarity on that. If the Minister can please repeat the case number that he mentioned, if that can be repeated so I can write it down. I can't never say if court cases are over, but are there any still pending court cases regarding this whole situation of who can be on the council or not? Is there anything still happening right now? And does the SER, you can never foresee, let's say, another person coming with a case or whatever, but maybe if the Minister can indicate if the SER feels like with this law, a lot of this sort of litigation is behind us, kind of like dovetailing off of MP Emmanuel's point, everyone has a right to petition the court for anything, especially public institutions. But let's also realize this comes at a cost, not just financially, but also in terms of workload, in terms of attention that should be paid on these type of things. And I'm absolutely not disparaging the right of the employer council. As a matter of fact, maybe it was helpful for the SER to have gone through this process because now there is some sort of jurisprudence to understand, for example, that was mentioned. That's why I wanted to see the case number, because maybe I can find it on rechtspraak.nl, but to see where acknowledgement is made to who, from a jurisprudence perspective, is to be considered an employer counsel, because that can perhaps be something that when the government is executing in accordance with Article 3, Section 1 about recommendations, that sort of jurisprudence can be in mind, that the court has already ruled on an appeals court level that this is the type of institution that should be, if I understood what is there, I would like to read it for myself, but a judgment has been made on what constitutes such a thing. Just to put it in practical terms then, can we finally expect, because very important, a big business, small business, both have to be represented. There's 3 slots available. Are we going to have a situation probably where it's 2 and 1 or 1, 1 and 1? How do we envision this looking in the future after this law is passed by Parliament, if it is passed? What is this going to become? You know, what I would imagine, this is just maybe my simple way of looking at it, if the Chamber of Commerce has always had a seat, the employer council has their rights, they represent a significant part of business community, they should also be a part of it. But if the SIA is also recognized as an important employer institution, then perhaps they should have a seat. Could the possibility for the government simply be to say, look, our recommendation will be Chamber of Commerce, employer council, SIA? Just my idea, or maybe the minister can comment on that, because it's important for us to know where are we going forward. If the minister cannot say at this time, you know, who will be appointed, that's totally fine, because it's not the purview of Parliament to say who should or should not. I'm just putting a suggestion out there, and if that consideration can be given. Also, in Article 3, Article 3, Lit 4, it talks of that by national decree containing general measures, further rules may be laid down with regard to the verification of credentials. Does that already exist? And if not, do we feel that that is necessary? The rule doesn't say, the law doesn't say shall be, but is that a consideration from the government as well? That will be all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Bryson. I don't see any more members of Parliament needing to do any clarification or many other questions. I see to my right, if Minister is ready to answer the questions right away. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the members of Parliament for the additional questions. Mr. Chairman, I would require approximately 15 minutes.
All right, so we have an adjournment of 15 minutes. We return 4:25. Meeting adjourned for 15 minutes. Good afternoon and welcome back. I believe the Deputy Prime Minister is ready with the answers posed during this meeting. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some clarifications as well with some additional answers. I'll start with MP Westcott Williams. When government has to request advice from the SED, what is considered as a significant socio-economic impact in terms of priority? There are 4 pillars that are considered: labor, government finance, regulatory framework, and socio-cohesion. Can you indicate the number of advices of SED wrote regarding the pension system on St. Martin? Looking at the proposal that is now on the table of Curaçao, MP would like the views of the different institutions on St. Martin. In 2014, the SED advised on a mandatory pension for St. Martin, and in 2020, SED advised on the civil servants pension system. I move on to questions from MP Bryson. Once this law, if approved, what happens to sitting members that have been on there more than 2 terms? Would the PM have to propose new members? The term of this current board ends on April 30th, 2023. It is customary that the employer organizations receive an invitation to submit a list of their nominees for the SED board. This will be the same going forward. Please repeat the case number that was mentioned. The case number is SXM. You could play by the recording. SXM 2021 H00134. Does the SED feel like this law will create court cases, will avoid court cases moving forward? Government and the SED is of the opinion that this law amendment will prevent future litigation by strengthening the law. Are there other pending court cases regarding who can be on the council? No. However, despite the outcome of the verdicts of the 2 court cases by the Court of Appeals, ECSM has turned to SED Netherlands and the ILO on March 22nd, 2023, lobbying for the 3 seats and the substitute seats on the SED. This was communicated to me. Article 3, the council consists of 9 members by national decree, appointment by the Minister of General Affairs. Once approved, what actions is to be taken by government? How do we envision the new board if this law is passed? Perhaps 1 seat for the SIA, 1 seat for ECSM, 1 seat for the Chamber of Commerce. Article 3 does not prelude both ECSM and SIA from being representative because according to the text that the article is based on, more representative organizations of employers and therefore not just 1 representative of employers. This also means that it may differ per appointment period which organization of employees can be regarded as representatives. Mr. Chairman, those were all the questions and clarifications posed. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Minister. I see MP Sarah Westcott Williams needs the floor. MP Westcott, you have the floor.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the answers. And just briefly, I'm still coming back to the point that I raised with respect to the discretion of government to ask for advice in accordance with Article 2 of the said regulation, the said law rather. And so I'll rephrase the question. Do you think that there is the need to, whether in law or otherwise, describe that at least, so where it says on matters of socioeconomic significance, do you think that it is a good idea to, for example, amend that, expand that with at least on matters of, and then whatever kind of matters that you think are at least, should at least not come to Parliament or not been decided on without asking said advice? That's where I was going with this of significance. Of significance, socioeconomic importance is could be very arbitrary in terms of, okay, this topic, yeah, said, what do you think? But another topic that that might be considered just as important or maybe even more important is not sent. So I'm asking, do you think that it could be an idea to give at least a minimum where that is concerned, so that certain matters, whether you tie it into macroeconomic developments or whatever have you, that you would say those areas must, and not only and solely at the discretion of government saying, well, yeah, that I think is a socio-economic important topic, and that is not. That's so again, I just kind of rephrase the question to maybe get your input into it. If you feel, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Minister, to the SER, if you feel that, no, you really have not experienced any or very few of a topic where you see it decided on and never really felt, well, government, you kind of should have consulted the SER. That's where I want to go with that. If it's not really an issue and you think, no, we're being utilized in the way that we should as a SER, then okay, fine. Then I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Sarah Westcott-Williams. I don't see anyone else for any clarification. Minister, you ready to answer? Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Also, thank you, MP Westcott-Williams, for the question and the clarification. Yes, this can be taken into consideration moving forward with it. We will consult internally with the AZ and also with the SER and return back.
Thank you, Minister. I don't see any further comments. A report will be sent to the government on this draft national ordinance. I would like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Duran, and his support staff, and the representative from the Sociaal-Economic Council, and for providing the necessary information. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this meeting. I thank you all for your participation, and I hereby close this meeting.